they've denied a lot.
The surveillance cameras are all over China, and they use that for, well, their excuse is to catch criminals.
I've watched your podcast on YouTube. It's the only, I don't watch things on YouTube. I certainly don't watch podcasts with two dudes talking to each other, but your show I will watch most of the time just because of the topic. Yeah. And, you know, we're friends. That always helps. I don't watch my other friends' shows, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But either way, there's the green screen. You guys put like footage of China, just street in China, not like necessarily cars, but people riding around on their little bikes or like scooters or walking around in a shopping district. And you, since you don't live in China anymore, I was asking how you got that footage. And tell me what you just said, because that's like a perfect frame for this whole interview somehow.
Yeah, so we have some guys. We have Chinese people. We have a couple foreigners. We have people that are sympathetic to what we're trying to do when we're trying to criticize and bring out the faults of the Chinese government and expose the lack of freedoms there. And what they'll do is they'll go out with a tripod or their camera or whatever, and they'll go film a street scene. But all of the people, like our detractors and people that try to rat us out or rat out people that help us to the Chinese government, try to catch them. What happens is they'll send us like a batch of footage that they've just taken 2 weeks prior, and we'll use it 2 weeks later. So then, like, when the cops are running around scrambling to find people who have shot that footage around a certain time that they think it's been shot, they can never catch them. So it's pretty funny. It's like this cat and mouse chase. And we do it with multiple people in different cities around China. So they still haven't caught anyone, but they've come pretty close a couple times.
I mean, I guess it could be 2 weeks or it could be 6 months. That's the beauty of it. And you could rotate something that you have that's old, just so people aren't like, oh, good, I look back 2 weeks. It's like, no. We're wasting tons of police officers' time by juggling clips that maybe got filmed for us and also could be anywhere from 14 days to 14 months old.
Yeah, and some of the stuff is stuff that we took. We shot. I mean, my buddy
years
Winston Serpenzade, the first YouTuber in China, he shot, I mean, I'm going to say like probably 50 hours of footage, you know? So there's a lot of stuff to use.
Yeah, it's like, it'd be like, yeah, look what's going on outside my window right now. And it's like dudes in bell bottoms and stuff, like rolling by, roller skating on those four-wheeled roller skates and mini skirts. Like, yeah, this is outside my window right now.
Dates the footage a little, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, someone's got like a G-Shock watch that's that big.
I mean, to be honest, though, you'd still see people rocking Chairman Mao T-shirts. You know, that doesn't date the footage at all.
So thanks for doing the show, man. It's funny. We started off wanting to do this segment on Russian propaganda, Chinese propaganda. It turned into a segment on propaganda on YouTube, and then I was like, this is a good end of a show, but we need to do the beginning of the show. What am I going to do? And it was like, let's just work the entire weekend and do a podcast instead of, you know, I don't know, sleeping and relaxing and eating. But you really, I'm going to start by patting myself on the back, which I rarely do, but I gave you a great idea for a video.
Yeah.
A really good one. And I couldn't make it. I wanted to know how the social credit system in China actually worked. And I don't even know anybody who could answer it. Google had almost no answers for this. And you were the guy to make it. And the only video that's more popular on your channel, by the way, is what's like your wife tries spicy food for the first time or something?
It's a Chinese girl tries American Chinese food for the first time. You know, the fake stuff.
Right, so, yeah, the sweet and sour or General Chow's chicken or whatever.
That's the kind of stuff I used to shoot when I would be like visiting my parents from China to go back home, right? And I'd be like, I have nothing to shoot. I have no content because I'm not in China. So I would come up with these like novel ideas basically, and that ended up being massively viral.
Yeah, well, I feel like that started a whole thing because that when you shot that years ago.
Yeah, that is the most popular video that's ever been shot in my hometown of all time, like ever.
Well, I mean, to be fair, you're not exactly from a major city. I won't ask you to dox yourself, but
no, I'm from upstate.
There's not
New
a whole
York.
lot going on out there. Yeah,
no,
exactly.
There's bears.
So, the point was not how boring your town was, but more about how the social credit system is only becoming more and more interesting for people, myself and people listening, because frankly, I'm not alarmist, like we're going to have that in the United States, but it's obviously being rolled out all through China, and it's only a matter of time till every authoritarian regime is like, this is genius, and it works really well. Let's implement something like that here. And North Korea, despite being technologically behind, has similar things that are just done manually and on paper, And it's just a favorite thing with authoritarians. You lived in China for 8+ years, so you're not just like a dude who has great Google Fu and speaks Mandarin, right?
That's right. Yeah, I lived in China for 10 years. I lived in the south of China, so in Guangdong province. If you think of Hong Kong, like the mainland part of that part that's connected to that. And I lived in Inner Mongolia, which a lot of people mix up with Mongolia proper. It's China's Mongolian territory. I lived there for a while. I lived in Taiwan, which is not a part of China, but that was in between. Yeah, in between my China days. But yeah, 10 years total in China. Saw the ups and downs. Really had absolutely no intention of ever trying to cover journalistic type things. Very brief rundown. I had my own business there. I met Winston, who's not here right now, but he was the first YouTuber in China. We came together because we were both on YouTube, and there was no one else doing it, right? So there was these guys. There's people asking us like, "Why are you in China? Are you gonna die over there? Like, what is it like? Is it super communist? You know?" So we're like, we both kind of came together. We're making these videos trying to show people that life is not like some alien planet. It's interesting, and our family was worried about us, so we want to show them that we're okay. And so we came together. We ended up, sharing our love for motorcycles. We ended up starting a motorcycle shop together, where we built custom bikes. And because of that, we ended up doing some self-funded documentaries together where we rode across the entire country and just documented all the good stuff that we saw. All the documentaries we had seen would be some massively high production BBC thing or Chinese state media thing. We wanted nothing to do with that stuff. We wanted to go out there and show people rural China. And when I say rural China, I'm not necessarily talking about like some backwoods area. It's just not the city centers that everyone's already seen. So we did that, and we predominantly just showed the amazing parts of China. But in that time, we watched China's regime go from kind of this golden period where they wanted to be a world player. They wanted to be on the world stage. They wanted people to look at them and say, hey, China's opening up. And then go from that into extreme paranoia. Really just almost overnight. We started to notice it getting really bad around 2015 and then really peaking around 2017 to where if you were a dude with a camera walking around the streets of China, even if you're showing the good things, you have police minders, you have people following you, have people reporting on you, have everyone watching your every move. And that really came to a head when we were filming our second documentary, and it was called Conquering Northern China. What we were doing was we were filming, again, just people in China, their daily lives, their normal experiences. And we were meeting up with some interesting Mongolian tribes. We met some really cool people that herded reindeer, awesome stuff like that. And we were in a town on the Mongolian border with Mongolia proper. And that night, we were raided by the SWAT team with automatic weapons, body cameras. There were detectives there. And
wow.
just so people don't, they have an incentive to go listen to our stories.
Yeah.
I'm just going to make it
we'll
super
link
fast.
To a bunch of these.
Yeah, but
we'll of course link to the videos. Like I've watched dozens and dozens and dozens of your videos, but we'll link to the ones that are relevant and of course the channels in the show notes.
So what was the concern is that there was a foreigner in a region that is apparently a highly contested area. Made a couple phone calls while all of us were getting separately interrogated, and I called somebody that was pretty high up in the province, and they in fact called their uncle, who confirmed that we were in an area that had a lot of separatist violence. A lot of ethnic Mongolian people in this town wanted to be part of Mongolia. It had nothing to do with China, and they were pissed off. Their language was being removed from public schools. Their culture was being stamped on. They got harassed by the army all the time, the Chinese army, the PLA. And they thought that we were some sort of journalists, like rogue journalists that were on the road, masquerading like we're filming cultural stuff, but actually we're going to film that story. And they were so worried it was going to be the foreigners that broke the Tibet stories or the Xinjiang stories. But long story short, it was this culmination of propaganda. So throughout the entire trip,
which by the way, let me jump in. If they had never told you that, you would never have really paid attention to that, and the story would have still been under wraps. But instead, they were like, let's make a huge deal about this and highlight it so that they wonder why this happened and investigate. And now all these skeletons are popping out of the closet, which is kind of like hilariously ironic. What an epic fail.
We were literally filming horse milk, okay? They milk horses and they make alcohol out of it. And that would have stayed that way. We just needed a place to crash. And it turns out, of course, because they harass us so much, I ended up, when I moved back to the US, doing 10, 20 hours of research on this, calling people, asking questions, figuring out the region, and actually breaking that story. And that was what their nightmare was. That could have been avoided from day one. And I found this to be the case over and over again, because later on the trip, the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, stopped us, took apart all of our equipment, took our photos. I actually snuck a little GoPro footage that we actually found that the other day, which is great. But long story short, I was harassed by the police over and over and over again, whether it be SWAT team, detectives, PLA. And it dawned on me that this was not the China that I moved to. This was not the China that, that I was in love with, that I was showing people. And that actually, in turn, caused me to look more into what the paranoia was all about. So I would meet people and have more personal conversations about what life is like for them. And if you get to know someone in China, especially in some of these minority regions where it's not only Han Chinese people, the Han people are like 90% of the population. If you go to these areas, it's not like the propaganda. We all live in harmony. We all live in unity and stuff. And the audience probably has heard a lot about the problems in Xinjiang and the genocide of the Uyghurs. All this stuff comes about because the Chinese government treats the minority people like they're not human, right? They belittle them. They don't give them the same opportunities. You might read on that they get easier entrance exam scores or something like this, like affirmative action stuff. But by and large, they don't integrate them into society properly. And that causes a lot of issues. But it's not just that. It doesn't, a lot of people might turn off at the idea that, oh, okay, the Chinese government doesn't treat their minorities well, but maybe for the 90% of the population, it's good. No, they marginalize the poor. Or even, the emerging middle class. People don't have rights until they're exorbitantly wealthy. And that became an issue. And that's something I want to speak out on when I moved back to the US. But I don't know if you want to get into how I ended up leaving China.
I will in a bit, but now that we've sort of given this, frankly, really good intro that I wouldn't have been able to do myself, so thanks for that. I'm going to save you said leave China. I'm going to say escape China. I'm going to save that story for a little bit. I want to talk about one of the more dystopian elements of Chinese society. And every show I do about China, I've always got to say this. It's not about Chinese people. It's about the Chinese regime, the CCP, Chinese Communist Party in particular. So if you are Asian and you're offended by this, you don't have to be, unless you work for the Chinese Communist Party, in which case, shame on you. But everybody else is fine.
We're all on the same team here.
So we're all on the same team here, exactly. Look, the best thing for China, or for Chinese people, I should say, is to live in a more free regime than the one you're forced to deal with now.
Wouldn't be doing this if I didn't have extreme love.
Of course. I'm still going to get a ton of crap for that, but I don't care. At least I can say that I said it and that it's clear. But one of the more dystopian elements of Chinese modern society is the social credit system. And that was sort of the initial, like, hey, let's make a show about this kind of idea. So it's not, I originally, before I saw your video, I almost thought it was like the Black Mirror episode where people are rating one another. If you've seen that, where it's like, oh, you know what? She never paid me back for dinner, that jerk, 2 stars, or like this person is cussing in the middle of the mall, 1 star. It's not like that. It's a little bit more, I don't know, formalized, if that's the right word.
Sure. I think it's really important for people to understand that the social credit system, when you look at it through the lens of something like pop culture, like Black Mirror, it becomes almost, it's like, it's not realistic, and you're not going to pay attention to it. That's when you get the memes. You get the John Cena memes, right? This all became super popular when people were making all these memes about John Cena and how he was shilling for the Chinese government, and then his social credit score would go down. And that stuff's hilarious, absolutely funny. But in reality, it's not like a glorified Yelp review. You're not going around and like ratting people out and scanning their face and putting them into some database and making their credit score to go down. Because
not yet.
When you recommended this topic to me, it put me on a month or 2 long escapade of trying to figure out what it was. And I was tired. I was tired of watching videos in my research, put out by, I'm not going to name names, but put out by other journalists and stuff like this that weren't lies, but they were very simplified versions that made it sound like this was some widespread entity that every single person has to deal with in China. And that kind of pissed me off because I knew that wasn't the case. I was talking to people and they were like, I don't even know what that is, right?
One of the things that I initially thought was like, hey, it's like a FICO score, and we have credit scores here in the United States. What's the big deal? But as we'll see, it's more invasive. It's based on a lot of factors that you would never be able to rate someone on here in the United States, and the effects that it has go well beyond whether or not you can borrow money to buy a house or a car.
Right. I like to say it's worse and not as bad as what you think. It's just different than what you think. So I found out that it had been implemented in a city called Rongcheng. Rongcheng is in northern China in a province called Shandong. Shandong is famous for having a lot of communist projects be tested out. So when I was there multiple times, what I noticed, there would be what you think, these utopian communist villages with a hammer and sickle stamp, and everything's beautiful and well manicured and taken care of, wildly different than the rest of the country. And for some reason, I like to call Shandong province the darling child of the CCP. They love to implement their dreams, their goals on things. And it's actually pretty picturesque. I mean, that's where you see the wind turbines. That's where you see a lot of the solar farms. That's where you see a lot of these picture perfect kind of Chinese villages where the water's clean flowing through. And it's just so diametrically opposed to what you see in some of the other places. So what I noticed is Rongcheng place is famous for, we went to go film there. It was famous for having these ancient Chinese houses, almost looks like a dwarf village from Lord of the Rings or something, where these roofs are made out of seaweed. And they use the seaweed, they dry it out, and they make it into like a thatched roof. And it's very beautiful. But at the same time, it's also not real. It's something that's been set up for propaganda. It used to be like that, but the old remnants of that are gone, right? It's used as kind of like a set piece. We actually found out when we were there that BBC had manufactured a lot of their footage when they went to go shoot there. We met a guy there who was like the village chief or whatever. And he took us around. He's like, hey, do you want me to go pay a bunch of people to put some seafood in the sand and then go pay people to go dig them up for you on camera? And we're like, why would we do that? We want to film reality, right? And he's like, oh, that's what the BBC did. And we were like, oh my God.
Really?
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is just a fisherman. Look, he's found
it was cockles.
Like,
they were looking for cockles.
Get his lunch.
Yeah, these are the famous cockle village. You know, it was this big thing that they did, and we were like, no, we'd rather film like whatever you do in normal daily life. So we didn't manufacture.
Wow. So the gas station attendant's like, you mean to tell me you're going to give me $10 to go down to the beach, pretend I dug this up, and then just start eating it? That's what That's how I'm going to pay. That's what I'm going to make $10 today. Yeah, that's so ridiculous. You know, that's so disappointing because I love watching things like Wild China and Planet Earth, and to hear that it's just like, yeah, we can either stay here for a week and wait for something to happen or pay the guy down the road to make it look like it happened. That's such a bummer. That
was something I learned when we self-funded our documentaries. We didn't know what we were doing. And we had two camera guys that we were friends with that were really good at shooting stuff, but we wanted to go show what we saw in real life. And that was so different than what like a big production team does. And it was disappointing, but it was also interesting to see. And it's not even that BBC thing aside, that's not even necessarily their fault 100%. It's the reality of how things work in China. So that for BBC to film there, they would have had to get Chinese government party approval to shoot there. And so what would have happened is they would have had minders go and set things up for them as well. So it's a lot of what you see from Chinese, like anything media related to China is a big farce. But Rongcheng, the city in general, is again this darling child of the Chinese Communist Party, and they chose that to be the litmus test for how well the social credit system was going to work. And I found the actual government official documents from the Chinese government and how they were going to implement it and how they are implementing it in Rongcheng, in Shandong. So what I did was...
How did you get those?
Well, honestly, I just started looking up, the social credit system on the Chinese internet, and it wasn't anything that was being hidden. It hadn't become a stigma yet. It wasn't really a thing that China wasn't trying to sweep under the rug yet, because it's something they're proud of, right? In China, it's like a patriotic
They weren't thinking
thing.
like, this is totally creepy and weird as hell that we're doing it. We should hide this. They were like, look at this great idea to rate everyone based on jaywalking.
In fact, I found it on a Chinese law blog or something like this, right? And they actually went later. They went later to say, like, if you've come here from Laowhy86's video, that's completely false. This is absolutely not true. Like, this is just like a reference paper or something like this. They were like, because they didn't know it was going to blow up into something like this, right? They didn't know it would get so much press. Again, it was for domestic population reading only. It was supposed to be something people were proud of. So what I did was I went through and I just translated verbatim what was in the document. So you had things like how people lose and gain points. What they came up with was a system where everyone's been allotted 1,000 points. Think of a video game. Think of like you're building your character in an RPG. You're allotted 1,000 skill points, right? And you can either go above that allotment or you can go below that allotment. And depending on how far you've gone above it or below it, you're rated. You got an A++, you got a B, you got a C, you got all this kind of stuff. And based on what level you are in society, you're allowed certain privileges or certain privileges are taken away. So in Rongcheng, where they worked on this, you would have things like if you're spreading rumors, you get points deducted. If you donate your organs, you'll get some points added on. If you
your own organs or someone else's that you're related to. That's the thing I don't understand. It's like, fine, I'm really in the hole on this social credit thing. Take a kidney.
Honestly, I couldn't tell you how that works. But anyway, you have a lot of different situations. Basically, a lot of them revolve around like, did you jaywalk? Did you spit? Did you talk badly about the party online? Right. There's a lot of this stuff was related to, did you go on a forum and say something bad about the Gongtan, or the Communist Party of China, right? So all of this revolved around creating a model citizen, which wasn't necessarily, is this person going to be an altruistic person to help someone cross the street? More so, is this person going to talk shit about the Chinese government? And we should punish him if he does so.
I wrote the ratings down. And I want to go through these just briefly. There's like AAA or AA, which is above baseline. Like, this guy's great. A is a model citizen. And what was shocking to me, and again, I guess it makes sense that they didn't know that this was going to be stigmatized and blow up, but there's an advantage getting into schools and in getting jobs, especially government jobs. And this is the official sort of position, as I understand it, right? It's not like a speculation. It's written in the dang document that is what they're going to do. Yeah.
Correct.
So that to me was shocking, because usually you'd be like, well, we'll just wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We only let A, AAA, and A apply here. It's like, no, you should do this because you will get a better chance of getting public education if you are doing everything the government wants you to do. So that was kind of insane. B rating, you're on some kind of probation. C, government inspectors are coming over to your house and checking on you. It's locked status for 3 years, right? So like, it just, no matter how great you are, you can go to every pro-government thing and donate all your organs. You're still going to be at a C level for 3 years, no matter what.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the lowest one, which is the blacklist. The blacklist, which is, this is amazing to me, it's public. So you're getting shamed like at an airport on a flat screen TV or something like that, because your face will show up. Or a movie theater? Okay, yeah, and it's locked for 5 years. The government inspectors are coming over to your house. You can lose your job. And I meant to tell you this, man. My Chinese teachers, I asked about this, and most of them said they didn't use it because, like you said, it's only in a couple of cities. But one of them said they did. And what was really interesting was on WeChat, which is like Facebook plus Instagram plus TikTok plus Snapchat plus your text messaging app and PayPal all in one over in China, and Google for that matter. She was chatting with her friend on WeChat, and he had his D status, or at least some negative status, in WeChat, and it said something like, this person doesn't pay debts.
Correct. Yes. So
yeah, so like that guy that she was friends with owed someone or some company money, and since he didn't pay, they were like, hey, if you're talking to your friend here, just so you know, they owe people money and don't pay. They're a scumbag. And she was like, what is that? And he's like, yeah, it's some crap that I got to deal with now.
You know what's kind of creepy was the amount of people that they cherry picked. Like, I'm talking about my Western audience. They cherry picked things that they thought were like based or good, right? So they would say, like, a lot of people would look at your Chinese teacher's friend who is kind of locked into that D status, where he's getting publicly shamed for owing money. And they would be like, oh, that's cool. That means that he won't be scamming people in the future, right? And that's the worrying thing, was that if China wants to market this properly, what I foresee happening is they're going to run a propaganda campaign with a bunch of Westerners talking about how the social credit system is not as nefarious as they think. And they'll cherry pick things like, oh, see, they get rewarded for donating charity, right? But they won't focus on things like, oh, but they get punished for talking to their friend at a coffee shop about how Xi Jinping shouldn't have too much power. So it's kind of a slippery slope, right? But
Absolutely.
When I was going through these documents, I was astounded at how well thought out it was and how kind of concrete these things were. But what I did find out was that this was only implemented in Rongcheng to that degree. And actually, the social credit system is not some cohesive unilateral thing from the central government. Although it ultimately stems from the central government, it's being experimented with in different cities with different problems. So they'll take a problem that a certain city has, or a perceived problem the Chinese government thinks that a certain city has. Let's say it's gambling. Let's say it's protesting, right? Something that the government doesn't like, and they will craft or draft their own document for that city, for their own schematics, what gives and takes away points. However, there are baseline things, like any time that you're talking badly about the government is definitely going to be a thing that's everywhere, right? One thing I found very interesting was it's also a way to secretly stop people from kind of posting or talking about their transgressions with the Chinese government while telling the public that they are allowing people to do that. And that's because technically in the Chinese constitution, you can go petition to Beijing. So Beijing's the capital of China. Let's say I have a factory that opened up next to my house. Very common occurrence. The groundwater gets poisoned and all the kids get cancer. Happens all the time, actually.
Oh, God.
And you can't do anything. You go to your local official, they threaten to kill you, they threaten to punish you, right? This just some really horrific things that happen in the Chinese countryside. So what do? You get helpless. You go to the provincial government. They kick you down the road. They're like, yeah, whatever, we'll look into it. Then your last step is you legally have the right to go to the Hall of the People in Beijing and walk up and post your petition and say, listen, this is going on in my city. Please deal with it. So what the social credit system has done, at least in Rongcheng here, is if you go and take your transgressions to the central government, your social credit score goes down. Right. So if you are actually legitimately following the Chinese law to go tell Xi Jinping's government that I don't like what's happened in my village, then you actually get deducted and you become less of a model citizen to do so. I found that insane.
Interesting. That's crazy backwards, because the most civically minded people who are like, hey, there's kids getting poisoned in the countryside. Nobody knows about it. I've got evidence. The local authorities are covering it up. They're corrupt. You take that person and you go, fine, but now you can't send your kids to school, get an education, and you're going to lose out on getting a passport or being able to travel. But thanks for your report. Like you're forcing those people into silence, but that's got to be by design, right? They just don't want to deal. It's almost like out of sight, out of mind. Like, look, they never reported it to us, the local authorities, whatever. It's their job to handle it. And it sort of cuts down on probably paperwork, and also they have plausible deniability that they never knew about it if they force people to report to the corrupt local officials.
There's actually a great concrete example. Recently, you guys might have seen the chained woman. This woman, basically in eastern China, she was chained up, and this guy that had her chained up, he was famous in his village in eastern China for having 8 children and being such a hero and raising them all himself. And what actually was happening was he had this woman chained up and she was birthing all these children and making him famous, right? So some people that were watching his live streams went over to go check it out, to visit him and say, what's up? How's it going? This is you're my hero, whatever. And they found this chained up woman in the back that had been being abused, right? Sexually abused. And she had been human trafficked, right? The Chinese government's response, again, people were upset about this, obviously. People in China are humans just like anyone else. They get mad when something like this happens. They think it's an injustice, but they have no recourse, unlike someone in America, right? So what happened was the initial government response was to hide everything, right? They said anybody that goes in and out of the village, get their license plate. Anybody that has been spotted talking to people in this village, arrest them. Interrogate them. Make sure you find out who leaked out this information that this woman was chained up. Not go save the woman, not go figure out how this human trafficking thing happened. That happened way later, and they lied about what happened as well. But anyway, that's how China works. When you have a top-down authoritarian system, at least the way that China operates, is that nobody wants to be held accountable for anyone's actions. So when the top says, go do this, no one can report back and say, hey, it didn't work out. they lose their job, potentially their life when something like that happens. And that's kind of how the government's structured within the social credit system, is that we don't want to hear about it. We don't want to hear about your problems, and we don't want to scare people into being in servitude to their local governments instead of the central government getting their transgressions or what they're upset with.
Man, that is horrific, of course. And your channel has a lot of examples like this, and everything's sourced nicely. I do want to just briefly cover how you can get your rating to go up and down, because it does seem like, well, wait a minute, this is a really good idea. Like on its face, before you look deeper and go, oh, it causes corruption and it causes people not to report on things, among other injustices. Like, look, if you return lost money, you get points. Mm-hmm. If you report on a dangerous religious cult, you get points. Well, wait a minute, what does that mean? Right? That's one of those, like, that could get, almost anything could be defined as that if somebody has a hard-on for any local church or church leader or religious leader or non-religious leader, right? Spiritual, anything. Resolving a dispute between neighbors. Cool. All right. Good neighbors. Helping cops get criminals. All right. Now we're getting dodgy again, right? Because it's like, are we wanting people to narc on everybody just to get their points up because they're a little bit low? Donating organs, hopefully your own or somebody that is dead that is closely related to you. I don't know. We'll put a little asterisk next to that one. If your kid does well in sports or joins the army or wins some sort of award, you get points. And if you win something like a medal in the Olympics or a national award, you get points as well. Are those the big ones?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'm glad you brought this up, Jordan, is the joining the army thing. Joining the army in China is something that people have always looked down on. I mean, I don't want to use like crass language or anything, but people kind of think you're a scumbag if you join the army.
Really?
Yeah, huh. It's not like unless you're like a super high up general. By the way, if you are a general in the Chinese army, you are probably one of the most powerful people in the country, more so than a lot of government officials. But if you're you're just like 18, 20 years old, and you want to join the army, they don't pay for anything. You have to pay for everything yourself, basically. You have to go and do odd jobs, haul lumber. Yeah, you have to do things like that.
Really?
Yeah. It's a very low position. And it's either the home of children that are getting in trouble in school or really poor people that just don't have any options to go to university or something like this. So to reward people for doing that in this time where I'm now seeing a lot of propaganda coming out of the central government that are trying to glorify soldiers and the army and being in defense of their nation in a time where they've portrayed to their entire domestic populace that the West wants everyone dead in China, right? The US and American people and the American government wants to kill China. So they've kind of stirred up a lot of nationalism, a lot of patriotism, and they're trying every avenue possible to get rid of that stigma that somebody joining the army is actually a low thing. And there's so much pro-army propaganda out in China right now, the movies, the TV shows, everything around online discussion. They're really trying to push that narrative in that direction. And it's a little worrying. It's really tying into that paranoia and nationalism that I saw right before I left.
Man, that's disconcerting, right? Because whenever you see a major world power start throwing propaganda, like America does this, where it's when they go on recruiting drives, it's like, well, crap, what are we gearing up for now, right? And when you see that from a world power that's opposite to your own, that's what they did you see that in Russia. It's like just not a good look, man. It's sort of a warm up for a prelude to conflict. Things you can do that'll bring your rating down. This is a little more interesting, right? Negative info on WeChat about the government. So if you're texting your friend and they see it because they see everything, right? They're hoovering up that data. If you're talking about the government, that's no good. Overdrafting your bank card, tax evasion, speeding, parking tickets, noise or disruption. Underground meetings is a shady one because what's that? Like, talking about or doing anything that you don't want other people to know about? Well, that's a little invasive.
That's usually religious, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like, right? And then, of course, you get points for narking on those, so
Correct.
There's that. Breaking the two-child policy, reporting a grievance outside your local jurisdiction, which we just talked about. I loved this one. Not properly sorting your recycling. That's a fun one.
You know what the great thing about that is? It's very important that
it all ends up in the same place anyway.
Yes. I mean, I'm not even I have video evidence of this. There are bins in China where it says recycling and garbage and it's the same bag. If you go onto the other side of it, it'll say garbage and recycling. They didn't even paint it on properly. So people are just chucking it all in the same place.
That's so it's so sad, but it's also the reason I'm laughing is because I've always had this like dumb 2-cent conspiracy theory that a lot of the crap we recycle is already sorted by a machine and they don't really need us to do it, but it's just a bunch of nonsense. Or we sort all those numbers and then they just throw 80 to 90% of it away, which I turns out is actually true because you know how the little triangle says like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They can only do something with like 1 and 4. The other ones, you could recycle it if you were willing to spend like an unlimited amount of energy doing it, and they just don't. They just landfill it, but it says it's recyclable. It's such a sham. I'm going to do a show about that, but it's a sham everywhere. But it's worse if it just goes into the same dang bag. Like, what's the point? They just want you to. They want to know that you will do what they say that they want to know that you'll do what they tell you to do. Throw that in the recycling bin because it's recyclable. Right. Okay, cool. And then after that, they're like, well, whatever. It's still going in the landfill.
It's just really important that people use the garbage and recycling thing as an analogy for how the structure of the Chinese government works. And that is, as long as the leadership got their face, as you say in Chinese, they got their face, it means they got their reputation. They bolstered their reputation from whatever they put out there, whatever. Like oftentimes you'll see cities in China awarded as the green city of China. And it turns out there's like 500 green cities of China. And it could be in a polluted dystopian wasteland with coal factories everywhere. But that leader of that city bribed the right person to get that award, and then they got their face, they got their prestige, and they got their rank higher in the government. And that's a lot of how China operates. And that's a lot of what I cover is the absolute hypocrisy of that, because if you look at Chinese propaganda, it's that everywhere else in the world is failing while China is succeeding. And what they're doing is just projecting exactly the same weird dystopian lie, propaganda that they practice in their own country.
Yeah, that's interesting because again, people will go, well, what about the United States? Which one is whataboutism? But two, the point is you can't go and say everything is great here and never admit to your mistakes. I think one of the great things is people will say, well, what about the United States? What about the United States? I hear that all the time. And I'm thinking, nobody complains about America more than Americans. Literally no one. Find me a group of anyone, anywhere in the world, maybe aside from North Korea, who just can't stop talking about the Korean War. Find a group that hates elements of America more than people who live here, but still love just find one, and you can't do it. No. But in China, you're not allowed to do it. And that is the point that I think, one of the points that I think we're making here is you're not allowed to do anything about this if you live there.
Correct. That's exactly well said.
And the last thing here that can bring your rating down, not showing up for an online dinner reservation. And they almost had me with that one, man. They almost had me with that one. Because
would you be screwed with that?
I thought if you can make... that's one of those where I'm like, what if you put your name in the Yelp waiting list and you just don't show up? But then I thought, they just go on to the next party, so it's not that big of a deal. But on a personal level, when people don't show up for things, I'm like, I want to downgrade your rating as a friend. I'm doing it in my head. I just don't have a formal way to put it into practice.
Well, when you're finished with your Chinese lessons and you achieve fluency, you can go apply to the CCP, and they might give you the position that punishes people that don't show up for reservations. That's
right. I'll be like, oh, you said you were going to be here to pick up your bubble tea, but you're not even here. Now I got to throw this thing away. -5. Hey, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There's a lot more just like this. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to the show. What factors go into this? Of course, they take your credit, right? If you overdraft your bank account, that's just pure credit/banking stuff. Are they looking at your they must be looking at your arrest record, right? What about your grades and stuff?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it depends on where you are, again, and how they're going to implement this in the end. But I think it's important to point out, I talked to a bunch of people around from different places fairly recently to find out what they were doing in certain areas. And education turns out to be a huge unifying factor in a lot of this. Not only are they looking at people that they don't want their children to be in certain schools because those people are considered unsavory by the government. They want to punish either government officials or citizens that have attributes of their family kind of psyche that are against authoritarianism or against the CCP in some way, but also just looking at people that are not performing like they should. I mean, this utopian dream that Xi Jinping has created, where he calls it moderate prosperity. Moderate prosperity means everyone should be, it's kind of a piss take of the American dream, but like worse. It's like everyone should be at a good enough level, and everyone should be there and meet each other in the middle, basically. No one should be super high and no one should be super low. And while that's kind of noble in its efforts, they do punish people for not performing to a certain level. So there was a thing during China's golden period, I always call it, maybe early to mid 2000s, where the kids that were previously like working their asses off and studying like crazy and going through the really torturous education system in China were, because there's more money, there's more influx, people can go out to a lot of people go to McDonald's or something like this. There was less incentive to be like, our family's going to starve if our child doesn't do well. So more kids were screwing around. You know, you saw kids going to get tattoos and smoking cigarettes now, stuff that was you'd never think of 10, 20 years ago. And skipping school and going to hang out at the arcade, right? All this kind of stuff that you would never picture China doing was starting to happen. So the social credit system really plays into trying to get kids to stop doing that kind of stuff too. Huge punishments, huge deductions for kids that are not performing as well as they should in school, and also getting them knocked out of whatever school they're in and put into some other sub-provincial school.
That's wild to look at your grades, arrests, credit. You mentioned there's 200 million surveillance cameras. So are they taking data from those somehow? I mean, I've seen the jaywalk cameras. Maybe you should tell us about those. They're at least using that.
Yeah. So facial recognition technology has become pretty ubiquitous around any major city in China. So for example, and it's honestly, a lot of people are proud of it, to go to a vending machine, scans your face, right? Which is attached to your WeChat ID, which again, like you said, is kind of like Facebook mixed with everything you've ever heard of, tied to your bank account. And it's deducting money from there just by looking at your face after you click the Coke button or whatever. I've seen a lot of funny memes actually where there's a chick or a girl or whatever, a dude trying to push the soda button, and then he immediately before it scans his face, ducks down. The next person in line gets scanned, so they get charged for it.
That's like a funny.
Yeah, that's
funny
like
meme
hardy har. We're under massive surveillance.
Yeah,
but it also works with buses, right? Instead of your bus ticket or whatever, instead of scanning your phone QR code attached to your bank account, now it's facial recognition technology. Heard a lot of this is pretty janky, to be honest, but it is being used. The surveillance cameras are all over China. And they're scanning your license plate. Some of them are scanning your face, trying to identify your attributes to connect you to your social credit score, to your status in society, to what you've done online, posted online, that kind of stuff. And they use that for, their excuse is to catch criminals. What it's actually being used for is identifying people that are having illegal meetings or talking, again, badly about the government. I can't harp on enough about how much of this boils down to trying to catch people that are talking badly about the government. It's really the be all and end all of all this stuff. You can use jaywalking, or you can talk about like letting your dog shit in the park or something, until you're blue in the face. Like, is that being a source of you losing points? But really what they're trying to do is finding dissidents and stopping and preventing future crimes, so to speak, which is dissent against the Chinese government. So with the jaywalking cameras, again, it's one of those things that, look, we can stop these like bad, rude people by taking their image when they jaywalk before the cross light comes on. And then immediately on a screen next to it, they'll show their face. In some cases, I've seen show their ID number, their government ID number. And then say this person has been fined or deducted points because they jaywalked. And it's really dystopian and horrifying to see, because or at least someone that with experience with China knows actually what that's being implemented, what uses that is being implemented for, not just jaywalking, right?
Right. It influences behavior. Look, the idea that it encourages people not to scam or spit on the ground or pee on a wall, that sounds great. And it sounds like a handy tool to punish criminals, and a tool that's only slightly more invasive than a credit score. But the problem is, like you said, Minority Report, right? You're being treated badly as a result of your past, even in the future. It's almost like felons here in the United States, if they were, and they're mistreated in a lot of ways, but this is like computerized and institutionalized. Like, you're not supposed to be able to tell a felon that they can't do a whole bunch of stuff like book a flight. Here's some real consequences from the social credit score. you're deprioritized for school and jobs, which is already hard enough. Like if you have a criminal record to get a job, even if it has nothing to do, your crime had nothing to do. If you sold weed in college, now you're having a hard time getting a job when you're 30 because that's still on your record, right? It's ridiculous. Right. You can't book rail tickets. You can't book flights. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like that's purely a punishment that just kind of goes in the general category. Like you're not bad enough to put in prison. We're just going to make your life a huge pain in the neck. What's going on there? And I know they've denied a lot. This isn't like some people. It's like millions of people can't book flights and train tickets.
I'm glad you said denied, because not only have they denied millions of people this privilege, but they've also denied denying those people this privilege.
Okay.
Right? They will go out and people will make excuses for this and say, hey, there's a reason for this. They were a flight risk. They were some sort of participant in terrorist activities or something. So you wouldn't let them on public transport. But really, when you look at it, it's a lot of people that are just dissidents. And I don't even mean dissidents like let's take down the CCP standing in front of Beijing with a placard. You can't do that, right? They'll ship you away and you'll never be seen again if you do that. I'm talking about people that in a WeChat group told, hey, be careful, there's cops pulling people over on so-and-so street, right? Because people have been arrested and deducted for those activities. And what happens is they want to make sure that people that are unsavory to them or speaking out against the government or doing whatever they behavior they want to punish aren't moving around. They don't want them to have a safe refuge somewhere else. They want to be able to track them in their area of hukou. And hukou is what the government designates you, where you have to live, where you have to work. China has this very archaic system. You can't just pack a bag tomorrow, if I live in Shenzhen, and go move to Urumqi. You have to apply. You have to change your hukou, so that's your household registration, where you're allowed to live and work, like I said. And you have to go through this whole rigmarole, this whole process of doing so. So they want to make sure that you, as a criminal or someone that they consider unsavory, stays in that place so that the local PSB or Public Security Bureau can make sure that you are behaving, right? It's just much easier. It prevents a lot of headaches, right? And the biggest punishment that I've seen that people that really want to prevent people from doing is that, let's say you are somebody that has a lot of money and you have party connections, but they really want to make sure that you are not going to be a risk for capital flight to move all your money to America, because a lot of Chinese government officials, no matter how patriotic you think they are, will move abroad and all of their money and family abroad. So what they want is to make sure they can even potentially frame people with some sort of economic crime or something, and then prevent them from getting a passport, renewing their passport, or applying for visas abroad. So really preventing people from leaving. And that's, again, it's a security reason.
Yeah, it all sort of comes back to national security. The other sort of really gross influences here, or consequences here, I should say, is one, if you have a high score, you have a lower wait time in a hospital, which sounds good. Like, all right, good, you're rewarding. But with health, it's a little bit massively unethical, right? Like, okay, fine. If you were able to skip the car rental line because you had really good credit and they could count on you paying, that's one thing. But if you have to wait longer to get health care when you are injured, sick, or worse because you are not a quote-unquote model citizen, the inverse then is also true, which is that if you are let's say a blacklisted citizen, they almost don't care about your health. And I say almost because I'm being generous here, but that's really what it's almost how it's written. No. They just don't care.
Can I just be frank?
Yeah.
As someone lived in China for 10 years, I can tell you this. If you think the healthcare system in America is dystopian, and this is in no way, shape, or form trying to make excuses for the American healthcare system, the quality of care is great, but it bankrupts people. It puts people in really bad positions in their life, especially if they don't have insurance. But let me tell you that China is on a whole different level. You have to pay before you get treated, right? So, people make a joke and be like, well, yeah, they'll treat you no matter what in America, but at least, you won't be bankrupted in another country if they treat you. Okay, whatever. But in a life or death situation in China, you pay first, right? And when you talk about having priority for healthcare based on your social credit score, that's already how China works. China's been working like that since the inception of the Chinese government. If I go in with some influential people that I know in China prior to me leaving, and I wanted priority treatment, I just have to send somebody very influential or someone in the government or someone that's rich to go talk to somebody, and I'm ahead of every single other person online. That's already how it works, right?
Wow.
So now it's just legitimized that if you're a nationalist, like a party-loving citizen or whatever, that you'll have that priority guaranteed in law. It's already how it works, though.
And there's a lot that can dissuade people from being a dissident in this case, but not having access to good health care is also really scary. Like, imagine you're thinking about saying something negative about the government on WeChat, and you know that your grandmother or your child can't get good health care if you do it. You're never going to do it, right? You're never going to say anything that could be misconstrued as not patriotic. So they're punishing your kids, right? Your kids can't get access to schools and education for the political and other crimes, and I put crimes in air quotes here, of the parents. And that's what's really kind of horrific about this as well.
I want people to understand that when I was in China, you could find people willing to have a conversation with you about the downfalls of authoritarianism, the bad principles of the Chinese government and how it's actually made a lot of people's lives worse. You could find people to talk to you about that. What this social credit system has done, and actually just the current leadership of China has done, is create a complete ecosystem, a self-sustaining ecosystem of paranoia and self-censorship. And it's really just changed drastically because, like you said, you're going to always have that in the back of your head that there are, even if they don't, there's a low chance of getting caught or whatever, there's always a potential that everything you say or do is tied back to you and will affect you or your child's life.
Super, super, super scary. I could never raise, this must have worried the crap out of you. Well, this wasn't around, but this type of thing must have scared you. I mean, you were raising a child and got married in China. So you were faced with this kind of thing. That must have crossed your mind at some point. Like, when you were there, were you thinking, okay, when we get older, we have to move to the U.S. because there's too much crap to deal with over here?
Yeah, when I left in 2018, and like I said, I saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah, it's not that long ago.
No, I saw the writing on the wall maybe around 2015, where I was like, I can still make excuses that China might, kind of flip into the good direction again. And it just wasn't happening. It was getting to the point where everything I was doing, trying to promote the positive side of China, I was just getting police interrogations. I was getting in trouble all the time, with no real excuse as to why, right? And I was just thinking, if I have to raise my child or, have my wife live in a situation like this where they're constantly being under a microscope of the Chinese government because I make a living by shooting video, that's just not a conducive environment. And I just bought a house. I should say an apartment. I paid in full for an apartment in China. I was ready to settle down. Everything was there. Like you said, I was married. I had a kid. My life was there. I didn't see anything. I didn't foresee any of this. I wouldn't have done any of that stuff. I wouldn't put down roots if I thought this was going to happen, but it did. And it was really unfortunate because I think China did a massive disservice to a lot of the people like us, like myself and Winston, Serpent ZA. We were diplomats for China. Although we saw a lot of
ambassadors.
Anyway. Yeah. Not official diplomats, I was saying. We're ambassadors for China in a way that we wanted people to not celebrate the Chinese government or something like this, but to show the human side of it. Because we did, for a lot of time, think that Western coverage of China was unfair until it got to a point where the Western coverage was not only fair in some aspects because of what had happened under Xi Jinping, but it got to a point where so many things were not talked about. So a lot of things that we came face to face with that had to be talked about. And like I said previously, when people started reaching out after I moved back, when Chinese people started reaching out and thanking me profusely for what I was doing, it showed you the symptom of what had happened in China. That kind of political discourse you could have before, the basic freedoms that were overlooked in this gray area of China in the early to mid 2000s were gone. And people missed that. People were very upset at that, and they were so happy. There were some people that could speak, read and write Chinese and could go somewhere else and safely talk about what was happening to the Chinese people.
So this system hasn't rolled out through most of China yet, the social credit system, right? It's sort of like a beta testing thing.
Correct.
I just wanted to put a button on that. But you're right. You guys showed the good side of China for 10 plus years. I mean, that was one of the main reasons that I went there. And also, I like China a lot. I really do. And I've watched a ton of your travel videos. And then one day it was like, I left China. And we're going to talk about that in a second here, because you weren't just like, you know what? Feeling like I need to get back in the snow of northern upstate New York. right? This is more like this sort of happened to you. How did this begin? How did your quick transition out begin?
So yeah, to make it pretty quick, like I said previously, we were filming our documentary, Conquering Northern China, and we were up in a contentious area of Inner Mongolia. When we got followed throughout that and interrogated over and over and over again, I knew that something was up, because when we were interrogated by the detectives 3,000 miles away from where I live, they were talking about me and Winston, my friend Serpent Zede, in the hallway about, hey, these guys work here. They previously had a contract that they left halfway through on. This is their wife. This is where they shop. They were literally going through details about us.
It sounds like you share one wife, which you don't. Just want to clarify that.
Yes, sorry, I'm sorry. Anyway, very explicit details about us, and they knew everything about us, right? And it turns out that anybody, doing what we were doing, not journalism, just filming, they have massive files on them, right? They knew what supermarket I go to. They know what restaurants I go to. They know who I talk with. They know, my preferences. They know everything I've done in terms of employment. They know what businesses I own, and then all this stuff. And this is really far away from where I am. So it's kind of like, you can picture like you're in Florida, and then you get pulled over for, speeding or something. And they start talking about like that one time that you went to a Barnes and Noble bathroom 3 years ago in California, right? It's very crazy.
It was a memorable experience. Yeah. But I can see them being like, why are you always buying so much caffeine-free Diet Coke at Target? And I'm like, excuse me.
Exactly. It'd creep you out, right? So this is how the story transpired. As soon as I got back from that trip, I was 100% sure that there was something going on internally in China where they really didn't want foreigners going around without state-sanctioned minders telling them what to film and who not to talk to. And because we did everything ourselves and we kind of operated in this gray zone of, we're not supposed to be interviewing people, we're not supposed to be traveling around and stuff, but we're going to do it anyway, as long as we don't step on any toes. It turns out that was the case, because I got a message from a friend of mine who had told me that there were police who were actually looking for me in this bar of a city that I lived in.
That's scary.
They were looking around with my printed out photo, right? Now you might think, hey, this is a surveillance state. Why are they walking around looking for you? Of course they know where you live, right? And they do. But I'd like to highlight the absolute disconnect with like a local police versus like a national effort. You in China, when you're a foreigner, you have to register to your employer. And my last employer was at a school that I worked at, a university that I worked at. Technically, legally, I had to live on their campus, right? So I was registered to their campus as that was my place of residence, right? But the apartment that I bought, in my wife's name, by the way, most of the paperwork is in my wife's name, I'm not registered there, right? So if the puny little local police or whatever are looking around for me, their record is that I'm going to be at the university, which I found out they had checked. They wanted to see where I was, right? Now, to really fast forward through things, it turns out that a fan of ours, and I say ours because of all the people that I have on our channel, stopped a friend of mine in the street and showed him a message. And I suspect that this person was actually in the Chinese government, but was either sympathetic to our cause or was hired to do this, but showed him a message that showed that there were people in multiple departments of the police or government looking for me, right? And the weird thing was I initially suspected it's got to be the traffic department. I owned a custom motorcycle shop. Motorcycles are banned in a lot of cities in China. They think it makes the city look poor. It's this whole face thing. It's weird. But I rode motorcycles in China, right? So I was like, okay, it's the traffic department. They're going to slap me with a fine or something, stop riding bikes in our city, right? Putting it on YouTube. But it was actually three departments. It was the Public Security Bureau, so the department that's in charge of all the foreigners, making sure like they're doing what they should or not doing what they shouldn't. And it was also the People's Liberation Army.
The army was looking for you. That's scary.
So the army wasn't necessarily looking for me when those cops went to that bar to go look for me. That was the start of something very, very sinister and crazy. But what happened was on these messages, by the way, which I got later on from an anonymous person that added me on WeChat, they said, as long as you keep me a secret, and obviously use some sort of alias or whatever when added me, I'm going to show you something, right? So I look at these messages, and they are screenshots from the People's Liberation Army, someone in the People's Liberation Army, the Traffic Department, like I suspected, and the PSB, the Public Security Bureau. And they were looking for me because the PLA said that I had illegally filmed an army base in the city that I lived in.
Oh,
now,
man.
the ridiculous thing about this is that I had already been interrogated by police about flying a drone in the city, right? So this has been up in the air for ages. They've already questioned me about this a billion times. But when the PLA is reaching out about it and conspiring with other departments, it turns out this is going to be something way bigger than I initially thought. The ridiculous thing is that the footage that I took was a huge bird's eye view of the city I was living in. And that exact same footage was all over the Chinese internet. If you went on any Chinese, because YouTube's banned in China, if you went on a Chinese video website, you could find the exact same shot by a Chinese guy to the public world to see, right? Yes, there's a government base, like a speck in there, right? Just because that's in the middle of the city. That's what it looks like, right? So there was nothing technically illegal that I had done. It wasn't some secret footage that I was unleashing to the world. It was just some random shot of the city that you could find 100 times over on the Chinese internet. That's when it got nerve-wracking, right? All this kind of stuff transpired, and I immediately found my wife, and she said, you need to get out immediately. You need to leave the Chinese mainland border right now while we sort this out. My wife's fairly connected in the area that she lived in. I've always felt pretty safe there because of that. We have family members in the government and stuff. They hadn't got wind of a lot of this until later. So I was like, are you sure? Packed a little go bag. The reason she couldn't come with me, or my wife or my kid couldn't come with me, is amidst all of this stuff, all of this writing on the wall that China's getting super paranoid and crazy, I applied for her green card, and she was a couple weeks away from getting it. So her passport was at the American embassy. My kids' documents were at the American embassy. They couldn't leave China. So I told them, get over to another person's house, right? While I get out of here, attempt to get out of here before this all blows up. So I have Winston, I told you about the guy Serpent and ZA, the guy that I work with. He takes me in his car and he lays me down in the passenger seat, and we just drive straight to the Hong Kong border. Now, remember, this is before Hong Kong's national security law, its own jurisdiction, its own legal system, its own law. There's still dissidents there. There's still, a lot of freedom there. So I get in line and I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, like I'm not even with my family. I have to get out of here and try to sort something out while I'm in Hong Kong, but I don't even know if I'm going to make it through.
Do you have to go, I assume you have to go through like an immigration exit line where they're like, oh, what's your name? Oh, that must have been, what was that wait like in that line?
I remember looking at some other people that were just on their phones, hanging out, chewing gum, like waiting to exit China and to go into Hong Kong. And I'm like, how do I act like them? How do I look more nonchalant? Because I'm literally going to die. I was like having a heart attack.
You're like looking around. You're like, I know I look so nervous right now.
I know.
What do I do?
My immediate thought was like, I must look so suspicious right now, right?
Sweating, like
yeah,
dripping
I was
sweat.
pouring sweat. So I go through the border line, and I get up to the immigration guy, and I'm going to paint a picture for you. In China, if you go through a border from a separate country, so Kazakhstan or Hong Kong or whatever, they'll have this like, how did I do? And it's like these weird dystopian looking smiley faces that you pick, They mean nothing, by the way. They don't contribute to anything. But
we
you stand
have those too in the United States. It's like, how clean is the bathroom? And you're like, no one's looking at this. This machine is broken.
Correct. The thing is, in China, you'll have the guards are like a little higher than you, and they're like looking down at you, and they're just like, they're just so mean. They're usually so mean. But anyway, I give them my passport. And you don't need a visa to get into Hong Kong as an American citizen. So I'm like waiting there. I'm freaking out. I'm sweating. And he asked me for the first time, I've never heard this in my entire life. He asked me, do you have a Chinese name? And I'm like, after he scans my passport, and I'm like, what the, like in my mind, I'm like, why is he asking me this? I've never been asked that in my life. So of course I have a Chinese name, but I lied. My gut instinct was just say, no, just like, I'm just some dude, right? Pretend like I don't speak Chinese. So he goes, okay. And he stamps me through, and I get out. So right now I'm past China. I'm in the limbo. So I'm in Hong Kong / China's jurisdiction. And a policewoman stands right in front of me as I'm in limbo and shouts over to the border guy, the border cop. And she goes, is that Ma? Is like the name, right? Is this Ma, right?
Your name is Horse. That could
one of the characters, right?
Yeah.
One of the characters. I don't want to give the whole thing, obviously, but
yeah, oh yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, because it's like a transliteration, right? So I'm like, what is she on about, right? So then she goes over to talk to him, and immediately after she gets out of my peripheral, I go straight to the area where you scan your bag, and then you get in line for the Hong Kong immigration part to get in there, right? She comes back, she taps me on the shoulder, and she asks me in broken English, and she goes, are you going to Hong Kong, right? And I go, yes. And she goes, are you going to any other country, right? Are you leaving? And I was like, no. And after the conversation, she goes, are you going to come back to so-and-so where I was living? And I said, yes. And she goes, good. And then she turns around and leaves. Yeah.
That is really, really friggin' scary. So like they weren't, what do you think happened? Were they just not sure if you were you and they're like, you know what, we'll deal with it when he comes back because we assume he's telling the truth? Like, it's such a weird situation.
I think it's a combination of, well, just to fast forward here, I got into Hong Kong.
Yeah, you're alive.
Woo! You know, like time to go sort this out and talk to people and try to figure this out because I have people in the government that I can talk to and try to figure out what happened. So anyway, after a lot of time, I initially thought, hey, this is just some bullshit where like they're being lazy or they don't want to deal with it right now because they're going to have to talk to the other side about what they're doing, detaining a foreigner, all this kind of stuff. But after a long time and speaking to a lot of people that have dealt with this kind of stuff, not just with China, but with countries all around the world, it sounds like they let me leave, right? And it was like encouraging me to leave. And the whole building the case and all this kind of stuff was definitely going to happen if I decided to continue making problems for them. But the fact that I left was kind of what they wanted, right? Letting me leave was like, okay, we don't have to worry about this shit anymore, right? This guy, we're getting heat from Beijing to not allow foreigners to do anything in the country. And if he's going to keep breaking this rule and filming and doing whatever, positive or negative, it's breaking the law from what they told us to prevent, right? So if I'm out, then I'm out. And a great example a great example of why that's probably the case is Winston, my business partner. He stayed in China like 9 months after I left, right? And he didn't have the same problems with the local government going after him. We don't know. There's probably definitely some sort of case that is being built against him. But because he was one of a bazillion foreigners in a bigger city where he lived in Shenzhen, it didn't catch up with him yet, right? It would have caught up with him just like it caught up with our friend Michael, the Canadian that was wrongfully detained in retaliation for Meng Wanzhou and the whole Huawei scandal thing, which happened right at that time, by the way.
Right. That's what was so scary is like in 2018, these two guys, I think they're both named Michael, actually, they end up in jail. Yep. And because the Huawei, was she the CEO? She was
CFO, yeah.
CFO. So she's under house arrest in China. And then suddenly these two guys that live in China are now being detained in like crap hole conditions for how long?
For years. So, I mean, Michael's a friend of ours because he helped us with conquering northern China. He speaks fluent Korean. He was like a fixer for North Korean type stuff. And we were in an area where there was predominantly North Korean people. When I say North Korean people, I mean ethnically North Korean people that were Chinese citizens. And he was our translator. He helped us out in the region and stuff. And he was detained at that same time. And we were all connected to that, right? We were friends. We had communications. We knew each other. And all of these people started kind of either disappearing or getting deported at that time. So it kind of was in perfect line with that. I think Winston left at the perfect time as well. Maybe he could have left a little sooner, but it was definitely coming down to it because he was still filming and getting interrogated all the time to the point where I'm pretty sure that the police there were trying to kick him out as well. But so in this whole process, it took me a while to call the right people and confirm that's kind of pretty much what happened. I mean, they were building a huge file, and it was the season of where CCP officials get ranked up or ranked down. So they keep their job or they get brownie points because they sucked up to the right person, or they ratted the right person out for tax evasion. And at that time, there was a massive incentive of the city I was living in to look for foreign spies. So you had Chinese people that were going on live stream that were calling the PSB, the Public Security Bureau, to say that I was an American CIA spy in China, right? You had them bragging about that, posting my whereabouts, saying we're going to catch this spy and stuff, because it was so incentivized to go after foreigners that were kind of had a public face or appearance on the Chinese internet, and prove that there was some sort of horrible entity that was trying to bring China down from the inside. So that all piled together that like people saw an opportunity. Hey, if I know this dude in the PLA. Hey, I know this dude in the traffic department. Hey, whatever. We can screw this guy over. He's a big figure. He's got hundreds of thousands of followers, right? He's made these TV shows and stuff. If we go after him and prove that he's some sort of bad entity and he makes our life easier if we catch him, right? So in a way, I think the central government wanted me gone, and a lot of people were looking voraciously at doing something to me to propel their careers forward.
That's why you didn't get an exit ban, right? When an exit ban was when you try to leave and they say, sorry, you're not allowed to. And that happens to journalists or people that they don't like, but it's almost like they wanted you to get out, and so they let you get out versus keeping you there and throwing you into prison, which is
if I had gone back and they wanted to follow up on the opportunity, let's say the PLA wanted to collaborate with the PLA that had almost detained me up north, and they started building this case, they absolutely would have placed an exit ban on me. They would have made the phone calls to make that happen because it would serve their purpose, right? Thankfully, I think I got out at the very right time to where the central government's like, hell yeah, he's gone. But if I had waited a month or two more, that wouldn't have been the case.
That is so terrifying. What about your family? I mean, spoiler, right? They got out, but you must have been so worried that you were out and they're going to be like, oh, you're never seeing your wife and kid again. That's what you get.
And that was the worst part. So it wasn't like, whew, wipe the sweat off the brow, I'm in Hong Kong. I was in exile in Hong Kong for a little while. What I was doing was hopping around to different hotels. I knew that if I was in a situation where they really wanted to get me, they could absolutely get me in Hong Kong. Even
they would just nab you, dude, and drive you back in the trunk of a car or something like that, right?
And that's how they do it. A lot of times what they'll do is, especially with foreigners, they'll go to their hotel room in Hong Kong and they'll plant drugs on them.
Oh my God.
Then they can extradite you or just put you in a duffel bag, right? Bring you back. Mm-hmm. So I was like, I'm not out of the woods yet because my family's still there, right? Thankfully, my wife got her green card sent to her, right, at her relative's house, and my kid was not a Chinese citizen, which was great. That actually helped a lot because my kid never had Chinese citizenship or any sort of Chinese documentation.
Really? That's interesting. That was a deliberate choice, yeah.
Yes, immediately after she was born. I immediately got her American citizenship because that makes it such a headache for the Chinese government to deal with. When you exit ban a newborn baby or a child and they're a foreign citizen, that's really bad press. Mm-hmm. A lot of my friends have their kids. It was more convenient for them to just let the hospital do their kids' Chinese documentation, right? They just let it happen and said, 5 years down the road, I'll go get their passport. I said, absolutely not. I'll never do that. And I think that's a huge factor into why they got out, right? Not only that, I think it was still in that sweet spot where they're like, if they can get out, whatever, right? Now,
yeah. Oh man,
what I can prove that it's not speculation is what happened to my family members in China, and I can't prove that to you on the show. But what happened to my family members in China afterwards is what kind of made me understand the story fully. And how dangerous it actually gets.
You don't have to prove anything on the show because, if I have credibility questions, you can prove it to me and then I can tell people I checked it out. So don't worry about that.
Yeah. I just for the audience, I want you to understand this precarious situation that I was in actually came to fruition about a year afterwards. After I'd already left.
This is something that happened to not your wife and kid, but like her parents or something?
Yeah, my wife and kid got out like not soon after. Really soon after.
Before we get into that, how was that flight home? Like every sphincter in your body must have been like,
I tell you what, I was singing like every you know, I don't even like country music or anything, but any patriotic country music song, like proud to be an American, or at least I know I'm free, you know, that good stuff. That was just pumping through my head. I wanted to kiss the ground when I landed, because at least I knew at that point when I landed in the US that this nightmare was over. I mean, I'm talking about 10 years of the best years of my life. I was Chinese, man. Like, all of my friends were Chinese. I spoke, ate, lived, drank, slept Chinese. I dreamt in Chinese. My business was in Chinese. Everything I did was China. And it was to the point where it seemed so bizarre to overnight just basically get completely booted out of a country that you planted your roots in, right?
Like Enemy of the State. You see that movie with Will Smith where suddenly like they're tracking him and stuff? Yeah, that's freaking prescient.
And I'll tell you what, the craziest thing was that on the way home, I was thinking, how am I going to break this to my audience? Because I'm a YouTuber after all, right? How am I going to break this to my audience? And I was like, I'm going to wait, because I don't know what the hell just happened, right? And finally, when I kind of understood everything, thankfully, right after this happened, like the day after this happened, when I was in Hong Kong, I shot everything. I pieced to the camera, sat down in the park, and I said everything verbatim what just happened.
I saw that video with the crazy guy yelling in the background. And you're like, bro, I'm trying to tell a scary story here.
Yeah, but I wanted to shoot that because I knew I'd never be able to capture that kind of raw emotion and how scared I was at the time.
You were shaking in that video. I watched it again yesterday in preparation for this, and I was like, dude, you can't. If that's fake nervousness, give this man an Academy Award, because you really were shook up, man.
Oh man, I mean, it was devastating. So like I said, it was so jarring, and I was like, how am I going to approach my audience about this? On the way home, I was thinking about this, and I decided, you know, I'm going to wait. So actually, after that, I flew back to Hong Kong. Like, I did other trips, right? I did all kinds of stuff. Of course, I never, ever went back into mainland China.
Man, but there were times. Those must have been the best tasting Delta Airlines peanuts that anyone has ever tasted.
Amazing,
on that flight out of there after that.
But I had to sell my house. Right? I still had a house in mainland China, right? So I had to go back. What I did was I went back to Hong Kong. This is, again, pre-national security law. I had to go back and ferry documents, basically. I had people go deliver documents to family members in the mainland across the border for me, because there's no way I was getting anywhere near that. And I had to, I wanted to tell my audience, like, hey, I'm moving back / I sold my house, right? So in those videos, I still didn't tell anyone, you know, people still thought I was in China. And then eventually I was like, you know what, like, obviously I'm never going back. Obviously this is like come to complete closure. And I finally put the video out, and I was like, listen, guys, I know I don't want to lie to you guys. It's been a year or something. I haven't been in China for this long. And I'm just trying to sort out and tell my story. And the audience was really receptive to it. And it just felt really good to be completely frank and honest about what had happened.
Sure.
And because when the dust settled, I got it. I understood what happened. And when my family members in China were, you know, what happened to them and stuff, it all made sense. And it made me so inspired to talk about all the stuff I had been hiding before in China, the stuff that I really never had the opportunity or desire to even say because of what it would have done to me if I had talked about that stuff.
So what did, and I know you got to be careful with the details, but what did happen to your extended family after you left? Like, did they start getting heat from the authorities?
Oh yeah. And again, I can't, they're there, right? I can't talk about it. But I can say that, I mean, heat is an understatement. I mean, it was a big deal. And it really, the scariest thing was it confirmed everything on paper with what I suspected had happened. It wasn't up in the air anymore. It wasn't some speculation anymore. It was what I thought. And when you know that you are on the highest of highest lists, priority lists in the central government, you know that something was going to go down. And when I found out about that, it was so funny, because when I put out my video about how I escaped from China, which is a direct, straight, emotional piece of the camera, they sent out all of the propaganda army and propagandists to talk about how that's absolutely impossible, how I'm not important at all. The government has no idea who I am. And I'm watching this and I'm like, I must have struck a massive nerve, because there was verbatim. Every single YouTuber, every single Weibo post, every single thing that was coming out about my escape story, it was cut and paste. And their whole thing was, you think you're important enough for the People's Liberation Army to contact you? This is preposterous, you know, like all this over and over again. Like, you think you're important enough? You think you're important enough? And it was creepy, right? And it was like, wow, they really don't want this story to get out there. I think they thought if I left in peace, then I probably wouldn't run my mouth about it. It would be a career devastating move to be like, oh, well, yeah, screw the human rights atrocities that the Chinese government does because I still want some sort of connection to China. And I said, absolutely not. I'm going to be blatantly honest about what the Chinese government does from now on. And they got real mad.
So when you book flights now, you probably have to make sure that they don't have a layover in like Hong Kong.
This is the stuff that makes me sick, is that Hong Kong used to be a refuge. Like I said, I used to be able to go back there. I went back there a couple of times, even after I left China. And I did it. Obviously, I didn't stay too long there. I didn't make my whereabouts known. I didn't walk around saying, here I am today live streaming in Hong Kong. It'd be on transit to Vietnam or on transit to Taiwan. And now, because of the national security law after the protests in 2019, 2020, I can't go there. If I go to Hong Kong, and I'm giving people ideas now, but if I get a flight rerouted through Hong Kong, as soon as that plane touches a runway, you're never going to see me again. I'm gone. I'm done. And that's really shitty because Hong Kong is a huge transport hub for Asia, right? So if I'm going to Japan, I got to make sure that I book a flight directly to Japan and hope that there's no bad weather on the way. Because as soon as they find out that I'm on the manifest, the Chinese government will take me.
That's so scary, dude.
Yeah.
That is terrifying because you've, of course, heard about the journalist dissident who flew over Belarus and they scrambled fighters to make the plane land and now he's in prison, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's like nightmare scenario for everyone. And that guy was just flying over Belarus. He wasn't landing in a place that is controlled by Belarus.
Right.
But
now,
he still was, now he's still rotting in a prison cell.
That is correct. Now, the thing about that is I have to also be careful with countries that are sympathetic to the CCP, right? The Chinese government. So I can't go to Laos. If I go to Laos, you can guarantee I'm going to be smuggled across the border. I can't go to Burma, right? I can't go to any of these countries that have very weak legal systems already and then are also sympathetic to the Chinese government, because to the right uneducated person, they don't really know that the smoke that's going to happen from the American government if they take an American citizen. At them in that moment, they might say, "Hey, I'm going to get like $10,000 from some CCP dude," right?
Yeah.
So in that moment, that's worth it. And hey, let's just make it look like he crashed his motorcycle or something, right?
Sure. Yeah. And then you're going to get duffel bagged. Yeah. It's so terrifying, man. And look, you were there for 10 years, and the crazy ending to this, it seems like it would have soured you on China. And again, not Chinese people, but the Chinese government. It just shows you like we're so lucky in Western democracies. But I also, it's kind of heartbreaking because like you said, you put down roots, you married a Chinese woman, you had a kid there, you were probably planning to you were just like this dude who adopted the country of China. And then they were like, now we're going to spit you out, man, hard.
Yeah, Winston and I, the first two YouTubers to do this, we were the China dudes. Why would we leave? That was where our bread was buttered. That's where all of our friends in life was. To say I'm soured on it, though, I mean, really what happened was I became very objective, and I said, this is a scourge to the people that I care about. There are Chinese people that appeared in my videos that ended up getting arrested and going to jail. Right? Just because they were in a video of mine, not because they talked about the government, not because they did anything, because they wanted to send a message to me, right? And I was like, if they're going to operate like this, you better be damn sure I'm not going to keep my mouth shut about it. This is outlandish. And I fell even more in love with the Chinese people and the people that I know and really put down roots with in the country that I care about so much. Because if I'm not going to do it, then who the hell else is going to understand China at this level and talk about it?
And no, you're absolutely right. It's interesting how this kind of sobered you up a little bit to China, but also you were, it's a little bit like boiling frog, right? Because while you were over there, you were like, wow, this is getting weird. Oh man, the cops are really bugging it. And then this was kind of like the slap across the face twice hard, where you get out and you go, okay, how did I not see this coming? And now it seems really obvious, right?
Yeah, I think that actually a really good point to bring up, Jordan, is that that slap in the face, that sobering slap in the face, was necessary to kind of show me and actually be able to tell people that foreigners are not welcome in China. You can make up whatever story, fantasy, fairy tale that you want. Say, I'm going to play favorites with the government. I'm going to be nice. I'm not going to talk about anything. The Chinese government doesn't want you there unless you can be used as a peon. And any time that you see footage or YouTubers or influencers out of China right now they have some sort of degree of the government approving what they do. And the government has hoovered up any influencer. And you saw this around 2019, around the Hong Kong protests, go from, okay, I'm going to make travel videos. Hey, look at me, I'm eating dumplings, to
it's always,
COVID started in America.
They all went from I'm eating these really spicy dumplings to, hey, you know what? Joe Biden something, COVID is an American bioweapon. Like overnight. And you're like,
it was
what?
Crazy. But it made so much sense, because that if you're not going to be used for the government's purpose, then you weren't, like me, you're not allowed there. Right. So you got to be very careful when you're looking at stuff out of China, say for just normal, like I'm going to a hot spring video or whatever. It is serving the government purpose, and it can be always traced down. It's a bit of a hobby of mine and Winston's is to go into a lot of these influencers' videos and see where the party connection comes in. There's a famous example that we brought up all the time, is that these guys, these shills, as we call them, YouTuber shills that work for the Chinese government, that always pretend like they don't, go to this random village in the middle of Shanxi province, and they go to meet these farmers that have somehow turned this desert landscape into a very nice place to grow vegetables. And they kept claiming, hey, this has nothing to do with the government. This is not propaganda. This is exactly the reason we're showing you that this is not related to the government. And then they go and meet the frickin' party official of the village and have to go dance around with vegetables for the glory of the Communist Party and do shit tons of propaganda afterwards. And it's down to the most, down to the most harmless levels that the party is using these people to spread Chinese propaganda for the Chinese government. It's maddening.
I definitely want to talk more about Chinese propaganda, and I know you have some observations about Russian propaganda that's very sort of timely as well, so I'll ask you about that as well. We talk all the time, and I watch your videos about Chinese propaganda infecting YouTube and elsewhere, and you recently said, hey, man, check this out. I'm seeing the same stuff with Russia. And I thought that was really interesting, especially, of course, not coincidental at all with the timing of the Ukraine invasion.
Yeah, I love the word that you just used, infecting. I think that's very appropriate. Just because of how pervasive it's become, how insane Chinese propaganda has become on the Western internet. Because, just in case nobody knows who I am, I'm sure some of my listeners and followers are going to be watching and listening, but I'm Laowhy86 on YouTube. I lived in China for 10 years. And because of that experience in China, because I learned fluent Mandarin Chinese, I was able to kind of take that experience back home to the US and watch how China under Xi Jinping kind of changed the way that they were going to deal with the rest of the world, the way that they were going to show themselves to the rest of the world. And I saw that through the increasing amount of propaganda. China's always had tons of propaganda. China's always had billboards with hammers and sickles. China's had banners all over the place talking about the socialist, revolution and the, socialism and Chinese characteristics and all this kind of stuff. But it was more of a thing that they just had to do because the party, CCP, the Communist Party of China, is in power. It's just kind of like the language du jour. It's just kind of how they brand themselves. But
like lip service, going through the motions. Right. Look at socialism, but whatever. We have Apple and iPhone and investment and hedge funds
and barely any social programs for our citizens.
Right.
Anyway, long story short, to see that kind of change and then to have an outward projection to show China kind of bragging about their own government to the rest of the world was something shocking to me. And that was only something I saw, like I said, under the Xi Jinping leadership. So when I started making videos that were more honest and more critical of the party's leadership, I noticed that there was counter videos, there were counter YouTubers, there were counter articles, there was so much, just a huge amount of information that was coming out to counter what I was talking about.
Yeah, it was like a full court.
And what I noticed
press.
is that
like a full court press with
first it was
bloggers and YouTubers, and it's
like a contingency plan for them, just
it's
in
like
case
the same handful of people doing it.
People in China jump the Great Firewall of China. They use a VPN and they go see an outward opinion. They go see a different opinion on YouTube. They want to make sure that their populace is in a position where they've already consumed enough brainwashing material in China to be ready for these kind of differing opinions. And anything that they hear across the other side, anything they hear from an American YouTuber like myself is just CIA propaganda, right? It's just the other side. They're so used to propaganda and brainwashing that, of course, America has that as well, right? In their minds. Of course, there's going to be another side and it's paid by the government and all that kind of stuff. So it was a contingency plan for China because what they want is they don't want their citizens to be consuming another opinion and then believing that opinion. So they kind of came up with this this idea that if we use foreign YouTubers, when I say foreign, I mean non-Chinese, so usually white guys, usually older white gentlemen. This is like what they do for some reason in China.
Yeah, I feel attacked, but continue.
Yeah, so they get these guys to go, and these guys usually live in China, right? They get them to produce content about how actually any differing opinion about how the Chinese government has human rights atrocities or is committing genocide in Xinjiang or anything like this is all lies. So then you have these, basically white dudes talking about how amazing the Chinese government is. So you have maybe 10 of those guys for every one of me, so that just in case these YouTubers or these people in China come over and look at this other side, they're going to say, oh, well, actually this white guy is mirroring exactly what the government's been telling me this whole time, so I'm not going to listen to the other guy. But what I think happened was I think they saw this as a dual-pronged approach opportunity. It was a way that they could say, not only are we going to, completely validate the brainwashing stuff that we do in China domestically, but we'll also be able to portray China as a wholly different entity than you'd see on mainstream media news in America. Is this place that's richer than the U.S., that has high-speed rails and has all of these amazing infrastructure projects that the government does, while at the same time, America is in decline and there's homeless people everywhere and destruction and gun violence and murder, and just hyper-focus on the positives in China and the negatives in the U.S. And they get the same guys, these we call them CCP shill YouTubers, they get these guys to do that. So not only are they convincing the domestic populace in China, but they're trying to convince people that are uninformed about the Chinese government in the West. And I think that I saw that kind of shift happen when a lot of these guys started getting huge on Chinese domestic media with subtitles, started popping up on their videos and stuff in Chinese. And then they shifted over to YouTube to speak English for their kind of like Western side of the audience. And it was very shocking to see, because it wasn't just YouTube, it was thousands of accounts on Twitter. Then it became huge posts and articles on I gotta say, ultra left-wing media like Gray Zone and stuff like this. You saw kind of this familiar faces popping up on this. And then at the same time, Chinese state media had a big rebrand. Chinese state media, instead of being called CCTV, rebranded to something called CGTN, so that now people are going to go and say, oh, that cute panda video I saw on CGTN, that's just some new news network I've never heard of, right? It's a whole rebrand. And then you see the same guys, the same shill propagandists popping up on state media. Then you see the same content that they're producing, the same propaganda pro-CCP content, popping up on Chinese state media with a watermark that says CGTN, and then the label below it that says this is sponsored, wholly or in part by the Chinese government. And it just becomes a snowball. It's a massive, huge propaganda effort. And it turns out it's part of a campaign in China called 讲好中国故事, which means like tell a good China story. And it was this initiative put on by Xi Jinping, the leadership, to kind of rebrand China, to show that China's not poor, and the only reason that China's gotten to where it is because of the Communist Party of China's leadership. And that's kind of how I got familiar with this whole timeline of how Chinese propaganda shifted to be purely domestic for its own people, to outward expansion, to convince the rest of the world that they've been lied to about China and the Communist Party is actually good for the country.
And it kind of works, because I see a lot, or I'm part of the information warfare landscape and I can't see around it either, right? Because I'll see comments online like, well, this is wrong, look at this video. And I'm like, well, that's just the guy who makes up crap all the time. It's the same guy. I don't want to mention their names, but the same shills that you see everywhere who just parrot the same. They'll read a script and you can tell it's a script because another video has the exact same script and that guy's reading it too. And it's like, well, you believe this? But then I'm like, well, is the account that's making this comment also part of this landscape, where this is also just like we say umao, so like a paid shill who posts online and says, everybody look at this video, here's a counterpoint, when really it's just the propaganda. You don't even know if that's a real person or not, and it's just part of the same information warfare landscape that we're in. And a friend of mine, a journalist, he says China's involved in it essentially creates an information warfare landscape that is so broad. The battlefield is so broad, you can't see that you're on it. That's, I think, a phrase that he may have borrowed, but I'm not sure. And what he means by that is, it's great, because what he means by that is you might want to fact check something a shill says, so you go to Wikipedia, but Wikipedia is being constantly hammered and edited by these shills as well, different groups of people. So you'll go, well, Wikipedia says this, and then eventually editors get around to fixing the Wikipedia page and they have to lock it because it's like, who keeps posting that this is the way that this happened? This is not the way this happened. The history books show otherwise. And then they'll constantly try and change things that make it look like Mao didn't murder 20 million people or whatever. And they'll do that everywhere, and they'll make a fake news site that just has totally different news, and they'll try and rank it in Google by linking to it. It's just such an outrageous effort that it makes it harder to find the truth, especially, like you said, if you're inexperienced with this, or you don't necessarily know history and you're just trying to do a quick search and a fact check. And it might look like there's 1,000 people saying one thing and 10 people or 100 people saying the other thing. And you're like, well, so many more people say this. Meanwhile, those accounts are run by 2 people and they work in Beijing.
Right. There's a couple of really good things you just pointed out that I have personal connections to very recently. Just yesterday, on Reddit, my video was posted on a subreddit called Our Documentaries. And as soon as it was posted, it was getting upvoted like crazy. People were enjoying it. And it was actually about the Russian and China connection between the two countries for the Ukraine invasion. And what happened immediately was comments were popping up talking about all of these things, like the typical talking points that the Chinese government uses to discredit me, and just flooding the comments section with it. And then immediately what would happen is those posts would get upvoted immediately. And then I noticed like this really interesting thing is that my experience with Chinese propaganda will say something like, oh, he's a racist because he talks negatively about China. That's like an immediate wu mao. It's a shill post. It's exactly like the kind of stuff, the cookie cutter stuff, that's not, really going to bother you because you've seen it 10 billion times over and over again. What does bother me was when it wasn't just those comments, it was something I realized there was a big shift in the way that the propaganda was coming out. And I realized a lot of these are actually Russian bots, right? I started to make a connection to the fact that I started seeing the same Chinese propagandists appearing on Russian state media. I saw the same type of rhetoric, the same type of conversations between the two. And then I started stumbling across YouTube channels that were whitewashing the Ukraine invasion that were set up identically to the Chinese channels. They'll start out like this. It'll be like a bunch of videos about, I'll give you a Chinese example. This foreigner moved to Chongqing, a city in China, and he loves it. And he loves it so much more than his hometown. Next video. This foreign girl moved to Beijing. She loves it more than her hometown. It's amazing. She loves the food and the culture. And it's like these like mini kind of harmless propaganda videos about how these foreign people moved to China and changed their life and they love it more than their own country. Then all of a sudden they'll build an audience with these travel videos. And then bam, a video will come out about how the Uyghur genocide is completely a lie. And so the people that have been following these people's travels or their kind of like organic looking vlogs abroad in China, all of a sudden get smacked in the face with this propaganda, and they'll be more willing to look into it because they kind of feel a personal connection with these people that have been introduced. And I saw that happen with Russian channels as well. There was these channels that were popping up with this foreigner moved to Moscow. He loves his life now. This foreigner moved to Vladivostok. Now they love their life more than back home. And then bam, 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 all of a sudden, random scripted video comes out. Basically perfect timing for the Ukraine invasion, saying, actually, the Ukraine invasion is completely justified because NATO is creeping in on Russia. And it's exactly the same kind of stuff you saw. But the reason I said it would disturb me a little more is I saw that the kind of bot accounts that would come and attack me were much more coercive when the topic changed to Russia. I shouldn't say change, when it included Russia. Because what these comments would say are, hey, bro, and they'd use my name. I defend you all over the internet. I absolutely love everything you do. You're a fantastic vlogger. Your content's good. Anyone reading this, like, he makes really good stuff, but you're completely off the mark here. And I loved your videos when you covered, the stock market crash in China and all this kind of stuff. But this particular topic, you're completely off base. And then they go as to why the Ukraine invasion is justified. And you'll read it and you'll say, interesting, that comment was upvoted a ton. People think it's organic.
It sounds like a well-intentioned criticism. Like, that's how I would say, that's how I would tell you, well, I would text you. But if I were telling an online influencer that I didn't know that they were wrong about something, that's exactly what I would do. Hey, I love your work. Your stuff is great. I love this, and this. But I just take issue with this one thing. So it sounds more credible than you're an a-hole, look at you, your ugly face is making me sick, barf emoji, right? Which is what a lot of the comments are.
You know,
right.
Yeah.
That's
your typical like China troll, right? They're you white monkey pig, slave monkey. They use all this horrible, horrible language, but it's kind of like something you can just discount. This pierces the heart. It pierces the soul because you're reading it and you're like, well, you know, like I want to take this as legitimate criticism, but then you look into it and you say, wait a minute, I didn't cover the stock market crash. I didn't cover all these things that they're actually, you know, they're basically taking, you know, topics that might have been popular at some time about China, but I didn't cover those things. Right. So what they've done is they've gone into my channel, figured out my name. They kind of say, oh, he talks about China, lists off a bunch of cookie cutter topics that someone would talk about and realize, wow. And then you go to their post history. They're on, you know, Russian subreddits. They're on tanky subreddits, pro-authoritarian subreddits.
What's a tanky?
A tanky is somebody that supports authoritarianism. So it's not just communism. It's somebody that supports Saddam Hussein, someone that supports Xi Jinping, someone that supports Putin. They like huge state-controlled entities, right? And they want to, and typically they're communist apologists, but it can really include anything because like Russia is not currently communist, right? It's an authoritarian state, but they'll be pro-Russia, pro-Kremlin, pro-Beijing. And they'll go out there and they'll actually act on behalf of these countries' governments to go and defend them. So you can have paid ones, you can have bot accounts, you can have people that do it because they're just trying to be edgelords on the internet and they think it's really cool. But to get back to that, when I was reading these, I was like, wow, looking at Chinese propaganda versus Russian propaganda, there's so many similarities. But when you get to the nitty gritty of it, the Russian propaganda is so much more coercive and so much more well thought out. And I noticed it also when family members were sending me articles. I get articles all the time coming from Chinese state media where people are duped. They're like, hey, well, you said that this, the concentration camps were here and they had satellite proof and you've talked to Uyghurs and their families. For example, I know this Uyghur woman, her home was just demolished on camera to punish them, right, for leaving Xinjiang and talking about the CCP. I know I have personal evidence of all this kind of stuff, but then people will reach out and say, hey, but I saw this thing over here on Chinese media. What it will be is it'll be a CGTN or a state media video, but it's been uploaded on a different channel without a watermark. So then they get kind of tricked. They think it's just some vlogger in England or something talking about
it's like laundering the provenance of where this thing is from. Like instead of putting up a news video and saying, this is news, this is Chinese state media, they might post the vlogger on Chinese state media, but then they'll take that same video and they'll post it somewhere else. And it looks like, I'm just Angela hanging out in Beijing. And look, I'm in Xinjiang. I'm dancing. They have great food here. It's awesome. And they're not saying, I got paid to go on this trip. No. And this video is completely manufactured nonsense. And I'm not allowed to go anywhere without this tour guide that's behind me. And we're only going to the same place that everybody else is going in this place in Xinjiang.
That's exactly spot on. We call these amplifier channels because what they do is they amplify state media without having to get labeled with that tag. And something I'm very upset with Google about is they won't add the state-sponsored tag below any video that you see from a government-run news channel. So CGTN says sponsored by the Chinese government. RT said sponsored by the Russian government. I want to see these amplifier channels that have the exact same content with that label. I'm not out there to cancel anyone. I don't even care if a government has set up $1 billion enterprise to pump propaganda out there, but it should be labeled as such, right? And that's something that I noticed Twitter's very good at it, and I just think that YouTube really needs to stop telling everyone when they're approached by the New York Times and other entities that say like, oh, we didn't notice any like kind of coordinated effort from Beijing, because that's absolutely lies. I mean, it's the exact same content on these amplifier channels. But to cut back to the Russia thing, when people send me China stuff, I'm very well versed in it. I know exactly what this is. But when family members were sending me stuff to counter some of my positions on the Ukraine invasion, in that I'm against invasion, period. As to why it was justified, I was like, why are my random family members in Ohio sending me articles that reek of Russian propaganda, but these articles look like some sort of Facebook blog post with like an American flag and like, I don't know, like maybe some gun lover type people would be reading it, Patriots Are Us or something
it's like
this.
The Ohio Patriot, but there's no such newspaper. It's just a blog and there's 3 articles on it, and one of them is this. The other 2 are about how great, some other program is, or like how the
Right.
Russian space agency is going to overtake NASA in 5 years.
Yes, that's exactly. So you know what I'm talking about.
I
here,
see all of it, and people
see
send it
it.
to me too. I just
Okay.
haven't done a show about it. Yeah.
Sure. So this is what blindsided me, was that I didn't expect to see some sort of very patriotic looking website with some random old man talking about why Russia's actually not bad and why Putin deserves to do this and how Ukraine is full of Nazis and all this kind of stuff. I didn't expect that. I just did not expect to see that because I'm so used to being able to decipher Chinese propaganda. So this, again, if I had to judge them, if I had to base them off each other, I mean, I think Chinese propaganda does definitely coerce lots and lots of people. But I think Russian propaganda is more targeted at a specific audience, like a certain age demographic, the type of people that are perusing around on Facebook and more willing to share random articles that kind of play into their interests or their preconceived notions. And it's something that I see now. The most important thing is linking together with the Chinese narrative, because I don't know if your listeners know this, but in 2015, China and Russia signed an agreement that basically says they're not going to speak badly about each other on the internet. They're not going to allow each other to do that. And that was something that really surprised a lot of people, because China and Russia are not, despite what propaganda tells you, are not allies, and they're not really connected in a whole lot of ways other than economically. I mean, China had a brief war with the Soviet Union. China was paranoid that they were going to nuke each other. China supported Cambodia while the USSR supported Vietnam. They were not allies. Just because they're communists, I think a lot of people have this fantasy that communist governments or whatever link up. In some ways, that's true, but China and Russia have always been paranoid of each other.
Maybe if they weren't authoritarian regimes, they would have, right? Like democracies tend to link up, but also if one is a fake democracy that has fake elections and is just they're not going to be a great ally of the United States. Not that we're always hooked up with the right people, but that's another show.
You won't get too much into that yet. Anyway, long story short, the whole thing about this is that I saw this agreement come out in 2015, and that's when it became more of a real thing, like fair weather friends, but like not just economically anymore. Now this is actually writing into doctrine and law that you can't kind of discredit each other, because we're going to go into this new world where the rest of the world is going to say enough of this kind of authoritarian garbage. And Russia looked at China's model and said, you guys are so good at censorship, and almost creating an intranet where everything goes through the censorship board. Everybody's ID is tied to everything that they post online. Their control is the envy of probably of a lot of countries, to be honest, even including the US. But when you look at it, Russia and China, when they made this agreement, it became not just, oh, we're going to trade wheat and oil together. It was like, oh, it was a creepy partnership that you didn't want to see.
Yeah.
And that's
we're going to project soft power and not interfere with one another doing that.
Yeah, and that's not good. So fast forward to now, I've seen them fully link up. I mean, China did. There was leaked documents that said that the Chinese government was officially going to take a pro-Russia narrative in the media and online, and that pro-Ukrainian or sympathetic posts to Ukraine would be deleted and would be censored and would be technically illegal. You now see China that's blocking broadcasts of soccer games because people are sympathetic to Ukraine in those soccer games. But officially, China's going out there and telling people that we have not taken a stance. We have not. We stay out of countries' internal affairs, when in reality, they've put their full support behind Putin completely. And officially, that's where it gets really scary and messy, is because the propaganda out there is portraying China as the reasonable one. I've actually seen a shift in what the pro-China shill accounts, so I'm talking about the Western YouTubers that are promoting the Chinese government, go from a silence to China is not really involved, but Russia's not wrong in doing this, to, okay, yeah, like Russia and China need to stand up to the big bad US and NATO, and it's their fault, to now, oh, actually, China didn't take a stance. They didn't choose Ukraine or Russia. They're both celebrating their relationships apart from each other. They're both completely diplomatically aligned with Ukraine and Russia equally, because we don't get involved, right? And they've gone through this huge shift to make China look like a moderator, or a mediator, I should say, in this whole affair, when in fact what they're doing is bolstering and helping Russia in this conflict. And actually, we're privy to it before it happened. I mean, we know that documents have come out that China asked Russia to wait until after the Beijing Olympics to invade Ukraine. So
That wasn't surprising. I think I might have said on this show that they're going to do it after the Olympics. Everybody said, "Oh, do you think they're going to invade?" I said 100% sure they're going to invade, and also they're going to do it after the Olympics because there's a ceasefire during the Olympics, and also if your ally orchestrates a massive propaganda event, which the Olympics always are, right? It's always like, look at how great our country is. The last thing you want is the international news cycle being like, except look at this other thing that's happening that's way more important and negative. That's always going to take the attention. So it was almost like, hey, don't announce your pregnancy at my wedding. It's going to take attention away from me. And that's unfortunately a great analogy for what happened with the Olympics and this invasion.
That's great, actually. Yeah, that's perfect. So, I mean, to sum it up, what I want to get across to people is that I want people to be hyper aware of the amount of propaganda coming at them. And it's not lip service. It's not like, oh, be careful. You might see a pro-Russia website or something. Be very careful because it's constantly evolving and changing. And its goal is to make you either take one side, but more likely completely apathetic to the situation. Because what Russia and China's goal for a lot of this propaganda is to confuse you so much to say, oh, all that fake news over in the West, they have fake news too, whatever, just forget about it. Like, you can't trust anything these days. You've seen that happen with a lot of people. They discredit journalists and proper journalism just because, oh, mainstream media always has some sort of bias. I don't listen to that anymore,
Exactly.
And that's super dangerous in this time period. And I think I don't want to see a genocidal regime like Beijing right now under Xi Jinping get away with completely changing people's perception to be apathetic to very real and serious problems that China's going through.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people will go, why do you hate Chinese people? One, I married one, so, trump card. But also, this is one of the most pro-China things you can do is sort of be anti-authoritarian because, and I said this about Russians a few weeks ago on the show, Russia has some of the most talented, hardworking, intelligent, just inventive people that have ever existed on planet Earth. They've just had their potential mercilessly stamped out for literally the entirety of the last several centuries, right? From the Tsar to the Soviet Union to now through Putin. They just, that's why when you see these Russians that have immigrated, for example, to the United States, well, some of this is biased because I live in Silicon Valley, but they all are brilliant and work at Google. And like same with Belarus, like our neighbors are all from this area and they're all just incredible folks and just talented stock. And I spent a summer in Ukraine and it was the same thing. I was just always blown away by how educated and amazing people were. And same thing with China. Everybody that you meet from there, aside from government authorities and people who have just been sort of sucking on the teat of the CCP and are given those jobs because of corruption, those people are absolutely incredible. And of course, what happens? You have to kiss up to the party. You lose opportunities to get a job or an education because somebody else is related to somebody, and so you miss out. These regimes have got to go because corruption is straight up inefficient. It's not just unfair, it's inefficient. It's like an externality, to use an economics term, like organized crime. People go, oh, it's awesome. It's only awesome if you are the recipient of this. Every single other person is bearing the cost. And that is a problem when you're talking about 1.3 billion people who are on an economic upswing, in spite of Xi Jinping, I might add, in many ways. And we want to see countries like China and Russia, for that matter, join the global economy and do really well. We just want to see them do that without threatening to frickin' nuke Europe so that they can have a larger backyard.
Yeah, you've said it perfectly. And again, I would like to, just for people not familiar with me, the reason I do what I do is because of the thousands of Chinese people that have reached out to me personally that cannot talk about this. So when when you say, I hate to make comparisons here because they're both in horrible situations, but when you see the thousands of Russian protesters go out there on the street to protest the war, and a lot of them, 8,000 something at this point getting arrested, you couldn't even see that in China. You couldn't even see 100. Right, in China, if something like this was to happen. And it's not because people don't care. It's because the people that reach out to me personally have inspired me to speak about the atrocities of the Chinese government because they can't do it. They can't do it online. They can barely do it in private at this point without something leaking out there. And the punishments in China are much worse than Russia, right? This is it's basically at this point, a good analogy I can use is like North Korea with money. It has the tech, it has the buses, it has the high-speed rails, it has all the bells and whistles to make it not look like some sort of Stalinist dystopia. But the reality is the way that the government works, it is a Stalinist dystopia. The way that the surveillance state works, the way that the cameras track you everywhere, the way your social status is determined by your party connections, all of that stuff is very reminiscent to North Korea. When I have people reach out to me and send me emails saying, please keep doing what you're doing, we don't have a voice. And when I meet people at protests here in America, when I go to anti-Asian hate protests and talk to people about how, they tell me the biggest form of Asian hate in the entire world is the Chinese government that have made me and my family flee over here. We didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave, right? People have to flee to avoid persecution for not even just religious freedoms, just basic personal freedoms like freedom of speech. So that's what keeps me going. That's why I'm inspired to do what I can. And that's why I'm usually an optimist, but I'm a little bit concerned about this fair weather friend kind of partnership that Russia and China have formed with their governments right now.
Well, I really thank you for coming on. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things you do, because you mentioned you had to leave. Well, one of the stories that people should definitely check out is, one, how you escaped from China. That's an interesting tale that you told. There's a lot of extremely kind of crazy, interesting videos about how China changes Hollywood movies to have different endings, or take... One of the examples that everyone's probably heard is taking the Taiwan patch off of Tom Cruise's jacket in Top Gun. Silly things like that. Or, hey, what happened to Peng Shuai, the tennis player who accused a CCP official of sexual assault and then vanished? Why Jack Ma, the billionaire entrepreneur, vanished and then came back, and now his stuff's being dismantled. There's just a lot of really interesting inside looks, detailed looks at China, and your channels will be linked in the show notes. One is called Laowhy86, Laowhy86, but also your podcast where you guys really go in depth. Tell us a little bit about that as well, because I do catch that pretty much every week because I'm a huge nerd.
And I listen to your show every week as well.
Yeah, appreciate that. A little back scratching.
No worries. ADV Podcast is where we cover Chinese current events. So basically on my personal channel, I'll go into something in extreme depth, but it's one topic. But with ADV Podcast, we'll take the news cycle not only from Western news about China, but from Chinese news. We translate stuff. We talk to Chinese people who, feed us information and stuff about what's happening on the ground in China. And we really go into, developing stories as well. So I highly recommend you guys check out ADV Podcasts, especially these last two episodes we did were primarily about Russian and China propaganda and how they've linked up with this whole situation and how it's personally affecting us. I think it's a good litmus test for people to see how things are going to progress. And we're kind of the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. So yeah, I appreciate you guys checking that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it'll all be linked up in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Looking forward to it,
So I
Jordan.
appreciate your time, man.
Appreciate it, man.